And good afternoon, and welcome to Thursdays with Charlie. This is week number 23. Amazing that we've gotten there so far. The 8th of October, 2020. Lots of interesting and good news to report. Our reservation system will remain in effect, but because of the governor allowing us to have up to 200 people at church as long as we socially distance and wear masks and take temperatures and things like that, if you make a reservation Thursday or Friday between the hours of 9 and 3. We'll have your phone number and your name already on the list. If you forget to make that reservation, please come. We can accommodate you, I'm pretty sure, at any of the 5 masses over the weekend, but we'll have to stop you at the door and take your name and phone number as well as your temperature to let you in. It'd be okay if we do that for a few people. If we had to do that for 200 people, it would really take a while. We're also going to be opening the doors of the church. Instead of 15 minutes before Mass, we will open the doors of the church to let you come in about 25 minutes before Mass, so that should give us time to load in the additional people. That's really a nice change. We are going to be going back to the Riverside, but not immediately. They have some 22 pages of state regulations they have to comply with, so we're working out with them how we're going to work compliance. As soon as we make a decision on the date to go back, we will bring back the 4 p.m. Mass on Saturday and the 10 a.m. Mass on Sunday to Don's Celebrity Theater at the Riverside. But for the next week or so, for sure, all of the masses remain here at church. And also, our troop raffle continues. We're raffling off 2 handmade Afghans. They were selling tickets for them at masses last weekend. Those tickets will again be available, $1 each or 6 for $5 at the masses this weekend, as well as in the church office during the week. The raffle would be, the first prize will be your choice of one of the Afghans. Second prize will be the remaining Afghan. And all that money will go to support the postage for mailing the Christmas stockings to the troops. Now, as I mentioned on Sunday, because of the COVID virus, the VA hospitals do not want to receive stockings this year. The active duty bases do not want stockings this year, so we're not going to be sending out the stockings this year. If you have made stockings, we'll be glad to take them and store them until next year. And with the money that comes in from the raffle will be put aside for postage for next year. But because of the COVID virus, we will not be packaging and mailing out any of the Christmas stockings this year. It's one more casualty of the virus, but we're going to get through this, and next year will be even bigger and better. We're very pleased to announce our Garces Center is moving towards completion very nicely. This week they're installing the carpeting, and I don't know if you can see the color's really nice. It's a blue-based carpet and a very nice design. So this carpet will be the main area of the Garces Center. We're very happy with it, and we looked at different carpetings, and this one seems to show wear and tear the least and be very nice and a nice color for us to enjoy when we're in the center. We also have something else to celebrate this week that I've mentioned before, but every year we should mention it. October the 11th, 2003 was the original dedication of our church building. This church where we have our masses now was the first church building to ever be built in Laughlin, and we have that to our credit. So this weekend we celebrate the 17th anniversary of the dedication of our church building, and after 17 years it still serves us very, very well, and we're very, very happy with it. Please, if you're here for Mass, take note of the building and be grateful that we have this wonderful place in which to worship in our little town. Now, Monday is Columbus Day, celebrates the arrival of Christopher Columbus in the New World in 1492. It's a federal holiday. It was made a federal holiday by Franklin D. Roosevelt during his term many, many decades ago. We're grateful to honor Christopher Columbus, so I looked up a few things. On Sunday, we'll do our usual Christopher Columbus quiz because I think we should honor the discoverer, if you will, of this great area of the world. But we have a couple of things I found out. Of course, we have an organization, the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic men's fraternal organization that's named after Christopher Columbus. But I also found out that in the United States, there are 19 cities which bear the name Columbus. So it's not only Columbus, Ohio, but there are 19 cities in the U.S., plus many other places that in one way or another bear the name Columbus. In fact, our capital is located in the District of Columbia, named after Columbus as well. And Christopher Columbus was a great explorer of his time. He's also a great mariner, set out to sail in uncharted waters. But he was also a man of faith. One of the purposes of Christopher Columbus's explorations was to bring the Catholic faith to the places that would be opened up through his travels. And he did. Missionaries did begin approaching the New World, if you will, because of Christopher Columbus and explorers like him. The federal holiday means that Monday is a day off, if you will. I guess we're all kind of off because of the COVID virus, but a celebration. And it's also Canadian Thanksgiving Day, which I think is interesting. Canadian Thanksgiving Day falls on the same day that Americans celebrate Columbus Day. Canadians celebrate Thanksgiving Day. I'll say some more about this over the weekend at the Masses, but one of the really cool things I think about Canadian Thanksgiving Day compared with American Thanksgiving Day on the fourth Thursday in November is American Thanksgiving Day, we kind of lump everything together on the same day. We have the watching of the games, we have the big meal, the turkey dinner, the gathering of the families, and generally it's all on Thursday, the Thanksgiving Day. Canadians have always seemed to have a wider view of that the Canadian celebration, the family gathering, the dinner, the sporting events can take place any time over the weekend. And so it could be a Friday night dinner, a Saturday dinner, a Sunday dinner, a Monday dinner on the Thanksgiving Day. It's definitely spread out much more. And I think that's really, really cool. As I said, on Sunday we'll do our annual Christopher Columbus quiz, and I always like to make people aware and make sure we're reminded of the events that school children years ago would automatically know because they picked this up in school. It's part of our American history. I also think it's interesting to note that there was a very good chance that America would have been known as Columbia because of its beginnings with Christopher Columbus. There was a map maker, however, Amerigo Vespucci, who built the first or drew the first major maps of America, and it was his name that got onto it, so we're America rather than Columbia. Just a little accident of history. We got several questions this week, and they were really interesting, and so I'm going to go through them one at a time. There's only 5 of them, but they are interesting in topic, so please keep the questions coming. They make for an interesting part of the show, and as with most questions, it's not only the person asking the question who has an interest in the answer, but there are probably lots of other people who just didn't get around to asking that question. And the first question we'll deal with is, the first reading last Sunday, October the 4th, was confusing. Can you explain it a little more? Well, I looked back. The first reading last Sunday was taken from the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 5, and it speaks about a vineyard. Very many of the Old Testament passages, when they're describing Israel, it is God's land, it is God's vineyard or God's farm or God's possession in some way. And the book of the prophet Isaiah describes the fact that the vineyard was not doing what God wanted it to do. It was supposed to produce grapes, to produce wine, to produce nourishment and joy for the people. And it was not doing that. It was producing wild grapes. It was producing stuff that was not, thorns were growing up. It was not producing what it was supposed to. And God kept sending prophets to it, and the land of Israel kept rejecting the prophets. And so the message from Isaiah 5 was, because Israel was not doing what God wanted it to do, God was going to extend his blessings, his countenance, his ownership, if you will, on more peoples. They were going to go outside of Israel. And in a way, this made Israel feel like, wait a minute, we're not God's chosen people. Of course, Israel was God's chosen people. But since you're not fulfilling the part that God wanted you to do, we're going to extend God's people to even the people who were not members of the Israelite community. And so it was an invitation to the Gentiles. It was an invitation that the faith was going to spread to people beyond Israel. And the gospel picks up on that as well, with Jesus telling the story about the vineyard and hoeing it and getting it ready, and it did not produce, again, the response wanted, so it was going to be leased out to other tenants, other people. The two readings, Isaiah chapter 5 and the gospel from Matthew last Sunday, match one another almost perfectly. Then we got another question. What's the difference between a cathedral and a basilica? And that's a fun one to answer. A cathedral is the main church in a diocese. A main church, the bishop's church, and it's called a cathedral because it has the cathedra, the chair, the seat of the bishop's authority within it. There's a special chair in every cathedral that is basically reserved for the bishop of that diocese or archdiocese. At one point, the Diocese of Las Vegas was joined with Reno. There was only one diocese in the state, and that was the Diocese of Reno. And so the cathedral was St. Thomas Aquinas in Reno. When we became a diocese on our own in 1995, the Diocese of Las Vegas adopted Guardian Angel in Las Vegas as our cathedral. So the seat, the chair, the official seat of our bishop is in Guardian Angel Cathedral. It's a main chair made out of marble. You can see it if you go to visit the cathedral. Now, a cathedral is the main church in a diocese. It's the headquarters, the main mother church, if you will, of the bishop. It's named after the bishop's chair, the cathedra. Not all cathedrals are basilicas. In fact, many are not. A basilica is a church named a basilica because of a special reason. Perhaps it has great historical interest. It's a title of honor. Perhaps it has great religious interest currently. Perhaps it just has some element of style that needs to be set apart. And there are 4 major basilicas, and all of them are in Rome. They're called the major basilicas in the church. There are, however, many minor basilicas throughout the world, and they're usually named because of some historical or particular reference. They represent something. Now, I looked it up, and in Nevada, our whole state, there are no basilicas. Nothing in Nevada has ever been named a basilica. But if you were to look at the whole United States, in the United States, there are 89 minor basilicas, churches that have been singled out because of a particular reason. Now, I can speak with a little authority about one of those churches. The cathedral in my home diocese, Archdiocese of Newark, New Jersey, is a minor basilica. And it became a minor basilica in a very interesting way. In 1995, Pope John Paul II was visiting New Jersey, and he came and he offered Mass at Giant Stadium. I remember that very well because it was pouring rain, horrible rainstorm, incredibly bad rainstorm for several days. And I was one of the priests celebrating the Mass with the Pope at Giant Stadium, along with many, many other priests. And in order to keep us safe, the Pope was under a canopy, but all of us priests were not. And so they gave us these plastic raincoats that looked like clear plastic garbage bags. And we put them up over our heads to try to keep ourselves free from the rain during the Mass. Now, I was so thrilled to be there. It was a great honor. And at Giant Stadium, they had this wonderful, what they called a gigantotron. It was a huge screen, bigger than life. I don't know how many tens of feet it was, but it was huge. And the camera panned around during the Mass, and I had my face plastered on the gigantotron. However, I was wearing this garbage bag over my head, and I was soaking wet, and I looked awful. And yet, around the country, people actually called me that night and said, "I think I saw you on TV. Was that you on the giant screen soaking wet?" And yes, in fact, it was me. That was my closeness that day. I did get to be near the Pope that day. I was within perhaps 10 feet of the Pope that day. Of course, he had his back to me and he never saw me, but I was that close to him at Giant Stadium. Now, the Pope, when he visited our cathedral in Newark, he did a prayer service there. And while he was at the prayer service, he made a passing comment. And that's all it really was a passing comment. "This church is so beautiful. It should be a basilica." A few weeks later, our diocese wrote to Rome and said, "The Pope said we should be a basilica, and please complete the paperwork for that to happen." And so we got named a minor basilica, Sacred Heart Cathedral in Newark, because the Pope made a reference. "Oh, this church is so beautiful, it should be a basilica." Now, in a cathedral, it's the chair that designates the cathedral, the seat of the bishop. A basilica is marked by two things. It's marked by a bell, usually a little tiny bell, and it's marked by a yellow umbrella. Yellow because it's one of the colors on the Vatican flag, and it's like a very ornate umbrella. It has a Latin name for it, which means umbrella. So the umbrella and the bell are the two signs that a church is a basilica. And so in New Jersey, we have the Basilica Sacred Heart Cathedral is a cathedral, has the seat of the bishop, and it has the bell and the little yellow umbrella representing that it is a basilica. So far, no churches, as I said, in Nevada have been named a basilica. And there's hope that, perhaps someday if the Pope should wander through St. John the Baptist here in Laughlin and like our church and say, "This should be a basilica," I'm willing to go out and get the bell and the yellow umbrella and honor our church as that. And I think we have some historical significance, being the first place where Father Garces visited, and I think we really are the birthplace and the heart of the Catholic faith here in our state of Nevada. That's the difference, cathedral versus basilica. I was kind of surprised myself to learn there are 89 minor basilicas throughout the United States. We don't have one yet in Nevada. We can keep hoping. Now, the other question we got was, why does the phrase "descended into hell" show up in the Apostles' Creed, and what does it mean, but it's not in the Nicene Creed that we say at Mass most times? First thing we'd have to look at is when we say the Apostles' Creed says, yes, it does, he descended into hell after his death. Jesus descended into hell, and he rose again on the third day. First of all, we have to distinguish the word hell in modern English kind of denotes a place of eternal punishment. We visualize it with fire. We visualize it with torment. It is not a pleasant place to be. In Jesus' time, for many centuries, hell was just one of the interchangeable words with things like Sheol or the afterlife. It just meant beyond this life. It didn't necessarily mean a place of punishment at the time. It meant a place of waiting, a place different than the existence we have here. And there's an old story, it's more in the realm of legend, that after his death on the cross, Jesus went to that place, and so the Apostles' Creed said, descended into hell, in order to tell the people to free the souls there, that they could now go up to heaven. They now had access to salvation. What was closed off to them by the sin of Adam was now reopened for them by the suffering, death, and ultimately resurrection of Christ. So the reference shows up in the Apostles' Creed, but it doesn't mean what we currently think of as hell, that place of torment. It's more of the place of waiting, the afterlife. Jesus went into the people waiting in the afterlife to remind them that they were now free to come into the real paradise. The Nicene Creed doesn't include that phrase. The Nicene Creed was put together around the year 3 at the Council of Nicaea in 325. It represented an exact statement of the faith, what things need to be believed, and it was just not included in there because it wasn't part of the absolute tradition of the scriptures that Jesus went to hell. Went to this place of waiting. And so normally at Mass we say the Nicene Creed and we don't include that phrase. When we do substitute the Apostles' Creed for the Nicene Creed, as we sometimes do, it's included in there. But the key thing is it's not the hell that we think of when we think of a place of torment and place of suffering. That's not what was meant by it at all. Now I got the other question we got was about the Liturgy of the Hours, sometimes known as the Breviary or the Divine Office. What is it? How is it said? Why does it seem daunting? And do the lay people, the regular faithful, ever say it? Well, the Divine Office, again, sometimes called the Breviary or the Liturgy of the Hours, is required to be said by all priests and deacons. Some religious orders make it a requirement for their members to recite it. Lay people can recite the Divine Office, but there's never an obligation to do it. It's just a form of prayer that some people have come to like. The Divine Office, let's divide it into several parts. The old names for these parts were, and there were 8 of them, Matins, Lauds, Prime, Terce, Sext, and None, Vespers, and Compline. Those were the old 8 times of the day when you would pray. Matins would be said usually in the very early hours of the morning, sometimes in the really like 2-3 a.m. hours of the morning. Lauds was said as morning prayer, the first prayer of the day when you were awake. Prime would be in the mid-morning, Terce around noon, Sext in the early afternoon, and None just before dinner. And then Vespers would be your evening prayer as you gathered usually in the early hours of the night, and Compline was the prayer you said before you went to bed. Now the more modern names for these hours are the Office of Readings instead of Matins, Morning Prayer instead of Lauds. Prime, Terce, Sext, and None are all combined in what is called daytime prayers. Vespers is evening prayers, and Compline is now night prayer. They basically follow the same timing throughout the day. The idea is to consecrate the whole day to God, and praying at particular times helps you do it. Most of the Office of the Hours is taken from the book of Psalms in the scriptures, and there are some scripture readings from the letters and other writings as well as other religious writings, but the bulk of it is taken from the 150 Psalms in the book of Psalms, which also, by the way, we had mentioned last week, is the reason why the Rosary follows the same pattern it does. The Hail Marys represent the Psalms that are there. I have one story about the breviary that I've always liked. I've always enjoyed the divine office. I've always enjoyed sitting down and praying. And when I went off to chaplain school, my first roommate was a guy by the name of David Thompson. And David was a member of the First Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. I might say this was a very local church. First Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. And he was the first minister of that church to ever be a military chaplain. And he ended up with me as a roommate. Well, several times during the day when we'd be back in our room, I would take out my prayer book. It was one of a set of 4 prayer books for the different seasons of the year, and I would read my hours, morning prayer or daytime prayer or evening prayer or night prayer before I went to bed. And David would say to me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm reading the divine office." And he said, well, what is it? And I said, "Well, do you want me to read it out loud?" And he said, "Yes." So he would sit on the bed with me, and the two of us would read the divine office together. Now, he had never been exposed to Catholic prayer before. And we got to the end of several weeks together, and David said to me, he said, "You know what I like best about that?" And I said, "No, what?" And he said, "It gives you something to say when you want to pray but don't know what to say. And it gave you that for every time of the day." And I had never thought of it that way. It is kind of a beautiful thing. Now, one of the complaints that people have raised, and it was actually in the question, is it seems daunting that there's different ways of saying it, different times of the day, different prayers that are said with it. How do you solve it? It is a little bit daunting if you're working from a book. The basic volumes of the Divine Office are 4 volumes for each sort of season of the year, and it's flipping back and forth from page to page. I find it much easier to use one of the online versions of it, and you can look them up. There's one called Terra Sancta. There's another one called Laudate, Laudate, and there are several others online that you can go to and just unload the app onto your phone or your iPad, and each day it gives you the hours in proper sequence with a good translation of them, and you just go through them. I find that's much easier to do, and so I use it myself right now. I think it's a beautiful way of praying. I love David's comment that it gives you something to say when you want to pray but don't know what to say. So the Divine Office, I think, is a beautiful prayer. As I said, priests and deacons are required to say it. Lay people are certainly welcome to say it. It can be said alone or it could be said in a group. And it is a beautiful way of staying connected with God. The Divine Office, Breviary, Office of the Hours, it's known by various names. Now, I saved the last question, the best question, if you will, for last, and that was, tell us about how you got interested in owls. Well, it goes back to 1964. That's more than 50-some years ago. I was a sophomore in high school, and my mother and I were out shopping, and I had always kind of liked owls because they represented wisdom to me. The Greek goddess Diana is represented by an owl. I've always liked books. I've always liked libraries. And very frequently you would see an owl with a pile of books as kind of a literary decoration. Well, we were out into Pier 1 Imports, a store that was very popular at the time, and there was this green glass owl. I remember it was $1.49. I even remember that at the time. And my mother bought it for me. And that green glass owl is the first owl that I ever owned. I still have it. I was not able to find it at home, but I know it's there somewhere. And I started numbering my owls from that one. I actually tried to put a number on each one of them. Now, someone had asked, how many owls do you have? Currently, I don't know because I didn't number everything since I've been out here. And actually, for the few years before I moved out here, I stopped numbering. But when I stopped numbering, I was over 1,000 owls. That's things with owls on them. Could be very, very small, like a coin with an owl on it, or very, very large, like a giant owl. I once had a giant owl costume that I wore for Halloween. I really liked it. I liked it so much that I even went into the bank many years ago wearing my giant owl costume. And I can honestly say I know what it is like to be escorted out of a bank by security guards, because at that time you really should not go into a bank wearing a giant owl costume, which included a full facial mask. I have been escorted out of a bank. It was one of the main points in my life that I will always remember how that felt. And I have not repeated that again. I still feel awkward today when I go into a bank wearing a mask. I remember that experience. Now, the owls over the years that I've received have been very, very many, and that has continued out here. I love owls because they do represent wisdom to me. That's why I'm so glad that we had an owl show up here during the COVID virus. We named him Pascal because he came during the Easter season getting us ready. And I think he's still in the area. He shows up periodically. I don't think he likes the construction noise, so he's not around for that as much. So what I did today is I brought down a few of my owls to show you and let everybody kind of see. Before I do that, I'm just going to mention one thing. You know, we talk about a flock of sheep. We talk about a covey of quail. If you have a group of owls, they actually have a particular name for that. It's known as a parliament of owls. So if you see a group of owls, that's a parliament of owls. So let me show you some of the owls that I've received and let you enjoy some of them with me. These are my office. They're over at church. They're over at my house. They're all around. Some of them are as small as a coin. Some of them are as large as 3 or 4 feet high. So they do take up a lot of space. One of the most interesting owls I've received is one I just toppled him over. I call Buzz. And Buzz is made out of all sorts of equipment. His wings are saws, there's horseshoes in him, there's some tools, and Buzz is a beautiful owl. He's very heavy, and I'm very glad to have him. And I named him Buzz because of the buzz saw that makes up his wings. He was a gift from some of our parishioners. I have a piece of glassware, which is a beautiful owl. It's a wine glass. I have a whole set of these, which I use at various holidays. Some of you saw the movie Harry Potter, and there's an owl that figures prominently in Harry Potter, and I have a puppet of him, and he actually can move his head a little bit over there. So a little owl puppet, and he's the owl from Harry Potter. Not the actual owl, but he's a model of that owl. One of my more valuable ones, and it has value for me, this is made of Belique. It's an Irish, I believe, porcelain, ultimately, Irish pottery, and it's Belique. He's a souvenir that I brought back many, many years ago from traveling. This owl is special to me. It's not the first owl my mother ever bought for me, but it is an owl she bought for me on one of my birthdays. It's an absolutely beautiful one, and over the years, I received not only this one, but I received one smaller than this, about half size, same design, and I received one twice that size also. But this is the one my mother got for me, and so I keep this one specially. This one stays in my bedroom and is always near my bed at night. This one I showed you at Mass. It's a storytelling owl. He speaks to us. He reads some fairy tales. He's kind of cool looking, and I received him from one of our parishioners very recently. And my newest owl was given to me by one of our parishioners just last week. He is a reading owl, being with the books in front of him. He's a solar owl. He has a little panel on his back, and his eyes light up beautifully. He is my newest one. And considering that I've received owls over the years, and I stopped counting and I was over 1,000, I would guess it's safe to say that I have 1,200, 1,300 different things with owls on them. My mother used to wear owl jewelry, so we have a lot of pendants and earrings that she had that were owl designed. I had an owl ring, and I had a giant owl belt buckle. My belt buckle was one of my prime favorite things. It was huge. It was about maybe 4 inches in diameter, and it had a big owl face on it. And I remember it always because I had a little kid in my first parish. He was actually a young teenager, 13, 14 years old. And he was fascinated with my owl, and I was fascinated as well. And he ended up contracting cancer, and this was back in the 1970s. And he ended up going over to New York to Sloan Kettering Hospital, a famous cancer hospital in New York City. But his name was Gary, and he never wanted to have a priest come in to see him except for me. And his contention was, he said, they're just going to come in and they're going to feel sorry for me, and I don't want that. I don't want anybody feeling sorry for me. I want you to come because you know me. And the deal was, we set it up with security, that if the priest came and he had a giant owl buckle, he got in. But any other priest that came to Gary's door, they were told not to allow in to see him. And we worked that. We did that for the whole time he was in the hospital. And some of you might recall that a number of years ago, I wrote a book about owls, and it was called Timmy and the Christmas Owl. And that was for one of the boys in my parish. I wrote a little story about him. We've had it published. We sell these books, by the way, if you're interested. I think most people in our parish have already gotten a copy because we've had it around for several years. It's a beautiful story. I want to end with, I found a cute poem. I think most of you, again, as children, might have heard this poem. A wise old owl lived in an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why can't we be like that wise old bird? Good thought. It's time for our other owl, Pascal, to come on down and join us. And as usual, he carries a Latin note, and it's a simple word, a Noctua. That is the Latin word for owl. Noctua. Even then, they were known to be creatures of the night, and the sound is kind of beautiful. So Pascal is a Noctua. And as for Pascal, somewhere over here I don't know where I put it now, I had a little plastic design. I have it over here, yes. I don't know how well this is going to show, but one of our parishioners made me a nightlight with the word Pascal and an owl carved on it. So I have that. So this is my personal Pascal Noctua. God love you and have a wonderful week.